I accidentally transferred $300 to a stranger and wrote, "I'm sorry." He silently returned the money. But the next morning, I got a text from the bank. Deposit of $31 million. The sender, that same stranger. When I found out, "Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think that my life was, if nothing else, orderly, predictable. The kind of life that doesn't make headlines, doesn't attract trouble, and doesn't ask too much of you in return. Looking back now, I understand that what I called orderly was really just small. I had made myself small for a very long time, and I hadn't even noticed. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I was 38 years old, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, Chicago, on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator broke every other month and the radiator knocked all winter, like it had something important to say. I worked as a compliance officer at Hartwell & Associates, a mid-size investment firm on North Wacker Drive. I reviewed financial disclosures, flagged irregularities, made sure the paperwork was clean. It was careful, unglamorous work, and I was good at it. After my divorce from David 3 years earlier, that kind of work had felt like a life preserver. Numbers don't lie, numbers don't leave. Karen, my older sister, Karen Mitchell Bauer, called me every Sunday at noon. Always exactly noon, as if she had scheduled sisterly affection into her calendar between brunch and a pedicure. She lived in Naperville with her husband Tom, who was a real estate attorney, and they had a house with a pool they never used and opinions they used constantly. Karen had a way of talking to me that felt like a hand resting on your shoulder. Warm at first, then pressing, then gripping. She would ask about my life and then quietly, almost gently, remind me of everything I didn't have. No husband anymore, no children, no property. "You're so brave to live like that," she'd say, which meant the opposite of brave. Tom was subtler. He smiled a lot. He remembered small details. My coffee order, the name of my ex-husband's new girlfriend, the square footage of my apartment. He filed information away the way lawyers do, and he made you feel seen, which made you feel indebted, which was precisely the point. I didn't think of them as dangerous. I thought of them as exhausting. There's a difference, and I wish I had understood it sooner. The first thing I noticed, the thing I told myself meant nothing, was in February, about 3 weeks before the transfer. Karen had called on a Tuesday, which was unusual. She said she just wanted to chat. We talked for 40 minutes. She asked twice, in different ways, whether I had any savings. She framed it as concern. "You know, with everything so uncertain, it's good to have a cushion." I told her I was fine. I remember feeling a faint unease afterward, the kind you brush off because you don't want to be the person who suspects their own sister of something. Tom called 2 days later. He mentioned casually that he'd been doing some estate planning work for clients and had been thinking about family. He asked if I'd ever thought about consolidating my finances, updating my will. He offered to look things over, free of charge. I said I'd think about it. I didn't think about it. I should have thought about it. The transfer happened on a Thursday in March at 7:14 in the evening. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and a stack of utility bills, paying things online the way I always did at the end of the month. Rent, electricity, the internet provider, a co-pay for a dentist appointment. I was tired. I was only half paying attention. I typed in an account number from memory, hit confirm, and watched the little spinning wheel process a $300 transfer before my brain fully registered what I had done. The account number was wrong. off by 2 digits. It wasn't my dentist's billing account. I had no idea whose it was. I stared at the screen. My stomach dropped the way it does when you realize a mistake in the same second you've made it, when there's no taking it back. Only the long exhale of, oh no. I found the confirmation screen, copied the recipient's account, ID, and typed out a message through the bank's transfer system. Brief, mortified, apologetic. I am so sorry. This was an accident. I sent this to the wrong account. Please return it if you can. I signed it with my first name. Then I set my phone face down and went to bed, telling myself it was probably some corporate account. Probably automated, probably nothing. In the morning, the money was back. No message, no explanation. Just $300 returned at 3:22 a.m., as if the stranger on the other end had woken up in the middle of the night, seen my message, and quietly made it right. I remember standing in my kitchen reading the notification, feeling this small, unexpected warmth. There are still decent people in the world. I made coffee, I got dressed, I went to work. I did not think about that account number again. Not until the following morning, when my phone buzzed on my nightstand at 6:47 a.m., and I reached for it half asleep, squinting at the screen. The notification was from my bank. Incoming transfer received. Amount $31,000,000. Sender. Park Capital LLC. I read it 4 times. Then I sat up. Then I read it again. Park Capital LLC. The same account I had accidentally paid $300 to 2 nights before. I didn't move for a long time. I sat on the edge of my bed in the gray March morning light, phone in both hands, reading that number over and over as if repetition might change it. $31 million. $31 million. The kind of figure that doesn't live an ordinary life. The kind that belongs to headlines, to courtrooms, to people who are not 38-year-old compliance officers in Lincoln Park apartments with broken elevators. My first feeling was not excitement. I want to be honest about that because I think people imagine that receiving an unexpected windfall must feel like joy. It didn't. It felt like standing in a street and watching a car come at you. A strange, slow-motion alertness where your body knows something is wrong before your mind has finished processing it. $31 million does not appear in your bank account because a stranger liked your apology. There had to be a reason, and reasons for things like that are almost never simple. I got up. I paced. I made coffee I didn't drink. I opened my laptop and typed Park Capital LLC into a search engine with shaking fingers. The results came up immediately, and I understood within 30 seconds why the name had the weight it did. Park Capital was a Chicago-based technology investment firm founded by Daniel J. Park, a Korean-American entrepreneur who had built his first software company at 26, sold it at 32, and had spent the last 2 decades turning that into a portfolio worth, according to Forbes, somewhere north of $4 billion. He was 54. He was a widower. His wife, Grace Park, had died of cancer 18 months earlier. He was notoriously private. He rarely gave interviews. There were almost no personal photographs of him online, only professional ones. A man with steel gray at his temples, a measured expression, and the particular stillness of someone who had learned not to react to things in public. I read for 2 hours. I read about the charitable foundation Grace had started before she died, the Grace Park Foundation, dedicated to financial literacy programs for women from low-income households. I read that Daniel had taken over its stewardship after her death and had pledged to expand it significantly. I read 3 different business profiles that all described him with the same word, meticulous. A meticulous man does not accidentally send $31 million to a stranger, which meant he had done it on purpose, which meant he knew who I was. I closed my laptop. I walked to the window and looked down at the street below, at the people moving through their ordinary Thursday mornings. A woman walking a dog, two men in hard hats standing by a utility truck, a teenager on a bicycle. The world looked completely normal, and I was standing inside something I did not understand at all. What do you do when someone puts $31 million in your account without explanation? What does a rational person do? Because I will tell you what I wanted to do. I wanted to call the bank, have them reverse it immediately, and go to work as if none of this had happened. I wanted my small, orderly life back. But here's what stopped me. I was a compliance officer. I had spent 15 years understanding how money moved, how transfers worked, what questions needed to be asked and by whom. And I knew with absolute certainty that $31 million arriving in a personal checking account, regardless of intent, was going to attract attention, tax implications, regulatory flags. And the moment someone in an official capacity started asking questions, I would need answers. Having no answers was not a position I could afford, so I didn't call the bank. Not yet. Instead, I sat back down and made a list. I had always made lists when things felt out of control. It was a habit I'd had since childhood, a way of forcing chaos into columns. I wrote down everything I knew. I wrote down everything I didn't know. And then I wrote down what I needed to find out. Number 1. Who was Daniel Park exactly? And was there any legitimate reason he would have sent this money to me? Number 2. Was this transfer legal on his end? Had it come from a verified, legitimate business account? Number 3. What were my legal obligations now that the money was in my account? Number 4. And this was the question that sat at the bottom of my list like a stone. Who else knew? Because Karen had called me twice in the past 3 weeks asking about my finances, and Tom had offered to look over my accounts. And I didn't believe in coincidences. I believed in patterns. And something about this pattern made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I needed a lawyer, not Tom. Someone who had nothing to do with my family, someone I had never mentioned to Karen, someone whose loyalty could not be bought by a poolside conversation in Naperville. I needed to move carefully, and I needed to move first. I poured the cold coffee down the sink. I showered, dressed, and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad. At the top, I wrote 2 words. First, understand. Then I started planning. The law office of Patricia Chen was on Michigan Avenue, 8 floors up, with a view of the lake on clear days. I had found Patricia through a colleague at Hartwell, a woman who had used her in a complex inheritance dispute and described her as the kind of attorney who makes the other side nervous just by walking into the room. I called on Friday morning and told her assistant it was urgent. I got an appointment for that afternoon. I brought my phone, the bank notification, and the 2 pages of notes I had written at my kitchen table. I did not tell anyone where I was going. Not Ellie, not my mother, and certainly not Karen. Patricia Chen was 60, compact, and had the kind of attention that made you feel like every word you said was being quietly weighed. She listened without interrupting while I laid out everything. The accidental transfer, the return, the $31 million, what I'd found about Daniel Park and Grace Park Foundation. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Have you touched the money?" she asked. "No." "Good." She made a note. "Have you told anyone?" "No." "Better." Another note. "Do you have any prior relationship with Daniel Park or Park Capital? Any business dealings? Any connection at all?" "None that I know of." She looked at me steadily. "Then the most likely explanation," she said, is that this was intentional and that he expects some form of response. A transfer of this size from a registered LLC to a private individual without a stated contract or legal framework is highly irregular. It will trigger IRS reporting requirements on both ends. He knows that. She folded her hands. Whatever he's doing, he did it deliberately, and he did it knowing it would force you to react. Which means he wanted to see how I'd react, I said. Exactly. She advised me not to touch the funds, not to contact Daniel Park directly yet, and to let her make some quiet inquiries through professional channels about Park Capital's recent legal and financial activity. She also advised me to secure my own accounts, change passwords, enable two-factor authentication, make sure nothing connected to my finances was accessible to anyone I didn't completely trust. That last part landed. I went home and spent 2 hours changing passwords. And when I opened my email to update a linked account, I found something I had not been looking for. 3 months earlier, Karen had asked to borrow my laptop for a weekend when she and Tom had visited and her own computer was being repaired. I had forgotten about it entirely, or rather, I had not thought about it since it happened. But now, scrolling through my account security settings, I found something in the saved login history, an access attempt to my bank's online portal from a device I didn't recognize, time-stamped on a Sunday in January, the day Karen had borrowed my laptop. The attempt had failed. My password at the time had been changed since then, but it had been made. She had tried to access my bank account. I sat very still. I read the log twice. The IP address was registered to a residential address in Naperville, Illinois. I screenshotted it. I sent it to Patricia. Then Karen called. Sunday, noon, right on schedule, as if nothing in the world had changed. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. Her voice was bright and warm. "How are you? You sound tired." "I'm fine," I said. "Just a busy week." "Are you sure? You seem, I don't know, distant lately." A pause, perfectly calibrated. "Tom and I were thinking about coming into the city next weekend. Maybe dinner? We haven't seen you in so long." She hadn't mentioned money. She hadn't asked about my accounts. She hadn't said anything that could be held against her. But I was a compliance officer. I knew what a probing call looked like. You asked soft questions. You gauged mood. You listened for what wasn't said. She was fishing. She didn't know what I knew, but she knew something had shifted. "That sounds nice," I said evenly. "Let me check my schedule and get back to you." After I hung up, I called Patricia and reported the conversation verbatim. Then I emailed myself a time-stamped record of it. Old professional habit. When something feels like evidence, treat it like evidence. 2 days later, Patricia called me back with the first real piece of the puzzle. "I've been doing some research on Park Capital," she said, "specifically on the Grace Park Foundation and its recent financial structuring. It turns out they've been looking for an outside trustee, someone with a financial compliance background, no conflicts of interest, no board ties, no existing connection to the Park family, someone who could be trusted to administer the foundation independently." She paused. "Sarah, I think Daniel Park ran a test." "A test? Your accidental transfer, your apology, his return of the money. I think he checked your background afterward, saw your professional record, and decided you were who he was looking for." She let that settle. "The $31 million is the foundation endowment. He wants you to run it." I pressed my fingers to my lips. Was it possible? Could something this large, this life-altering, come from something as small as a $300 mistake and the honesty to immediately say, "I'm sorry"? "What do?" I asked. "You meet him," Patricia said, And before you do, we make sure everything is protected, legally and financially. Because, Sarah, if your sister attempted unauthorized access to your bank account in January, and now $31 million has appeared in that same account, she is going to find out, and when she does, you need to be ready. I looked out my window at the Chicago skyline, gray and solid against the winter sky. I was ready to stop being small. The meeting with Daniel Park took place on a Wednesday morning in a conference room at Park Capital's offices on Michigan Avenue, 11 floors above the city. Patricia came with me. We'd spent 4 days preparing, reviewing the foundation's charter, the proposed trustee agreement, the legal scope of my responsibilities, the full financial picture of what $31 million meant in practical terms. It was the foundation's initial endowment, structured to fund financial literacy programs across 5 states, with a director's salary, a small staff, and full operational independence. Daniel Park was not what I had expected, though I couldn't have said exactly what I had expected. He was calm, measured, and spoke the way people speak when they have long since stopped needing to impress anyone. He explained, without any particular drama, what had happened. He had been searching for a trustee for 8 months. He had interviewed candidates through formal channels, resumes, references, structured meetings, and none of them had felt right. His late wife, Grace, had been specific in her instructions. She wanted someone with financial discipline and personal integrity, not someone who sought the position. Then, at 3 a.m. on a Thursday, he had found a $300 transfer from a stranger with a message that said simply, "I am so sorry. This was an accident. Please return it if you can." He had run a background check within the hour. He had found 15 years of clean compliance records, an impeccable professional reputation, and not a single financial irregularity on my personal or professional accounts. He had returned the money. Then he had made his decision. The transfer was a formality, he said, a way of opening a door. I realized it was unconventional. It was terrifying, I said honestly. Something moved briefly across his face. Grace would have liked that answer, he said. We signed the preliminary trustee agreement that afternoon. Patricia had negotiated strong legal protections. The funds were held in a foundation trust that I administered but could not personally access without a board approval process, which protected me as much as it protected the foundation. My name was not yet public. We had agreed to a quiet, structured announcement once the paperwork was complete. I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in years, that my particular set of skills, the careful, unglamorous work of tracking numbers and finding truth in paperwork, was exactly what was needed, not a consolation prize for a life that hadn't gone as planned, actually exactly right. I should have known the peace wouldn't last a week. Karen showed up at my apartment on Saturday evening unannounced, Tom behind her, both of them dressed as if they had come from somewhere important. Karen's eyes swept my apartment the way they always did, cataloging, assessing. Tom smiled his particular smile. "We were in the neighborhood," Karen said, which was almost certainly a lie. Naperville is not in the neighborhood of Lincoln Park. I let them in. I made tea. I waited. It took 11 minutes. Tom, leaning back in my kitchen chair with his arms folded, said, "So, we heard something interesting." He looked at me with that careful smile, about a rather significant deposit. I felt the cold move through me, but I kept my face still. Years of compliance work teach you that. "Where did you hear that?" I asked. "Does it matter? Is it true?" I said nothing. Karen leaned forward. "Sarah, we're family. If something has happened, something financial, something that could be complicated, Tom can help. You shouldn't be navigating this alone. You have no idea what kind of legal exposure you could be looking at." Her voice was warm and reasonable and absolutely deliberate. If someone has transferred money to your account without a clear legal basis, that could be considered— "I know what it could be considered," I said quietly. "I'm a compliance officer." Tom's smile thinned slightly. "Then you know you need legal counsel." "I have legal counsel." That surprised them. Karen's warmth flickered. "Since when?" she asked. "Since this became relevant." I set down my tea. "I appreciate you coming by, but I have everything handled." Tom's voice dropped to something lower, less performative. "Sarah, we know about the Park Capital transfer. That kind of money doesn't just arrive without consequences. If you try to handle this without the right structure, it will fall apart. And when it falls apart, there are people who will want to know where the money went." He paused. "We're trying to protect you." "No," I said. "You're not." We looked at each other across the kitchen table, and for the first time in my adult life, I did not look away first. They left 20 minutes later. Karen kissed my cheek at the door. Tom shook my hand. Both of them were perfectly civil, and both of them, I knew, were furious. I called Patricia the moment the door closed and reported every word from memory. Then I poured the remaining tea down the sink, sat on my couch, and allowed myself one evening of feeling completely overwhelmed. I cried a little. I ordered food I barely ate. I watched something on television I couldn't recall afterward. Then I booked 4 days at a small inn in Michigan, a place I had gone once with a friend. Quiet. No cell service unless you walk to a specific hill near the water. I needed to breathe. I needed to be somewhere that Karen and Tom didn't know about, where I could remember who I was before any of this had happened. I left Monday morning before dawn. The inn was called the Blue Heron, a converted farmhouse 40 minutes from Lake Michigan, run by an older woman named Ruth, who appeared to have no interest in your story and every interest in making sure you ate well and slept through the night. My room had a window seat, a wood stove, and a view of a field that turned silver in the mornings. It was exactly what I needed. I walked for hours each day. I thought. I let the confusion and fear that had been compressing in my chest expand and then, gradually, dissipate. I had made the right decisions. Patricia was careful and thorough. The legal framework was solid. The foundation agreement was real. What Karen and Tom wanted was not going to happen, not because I was powerful, but because I had been careful, and careful was enough. On the second day, I climbed to the hill with the cell service and found 3 missed calls from Karen, one from an unknown number and a voicemail from Tom. I listened to Tom's voicemail once, standing in the cold wind with the fields spread out below me. "Sarah." His voice was measured, patient, the tone of someone performing reasonableness. "I've been doing some research, and I think you may not fully understand the legal complexity of the position you're accepting. A trusteeship of this size carries fiduciary liability that most people aren't equipped to manage without experienced legal counsel. I only want to make sure you understand your exposure. Call me when you can." The message was elegant. It was also a threat dressed as advice. He wanted me afraid. He wanted me calling him back, asking for help, opening a door. Because once I opened a door for Tom Bauer, he would stand in it until he owned the house. I deleted the voicemail. I did not call back. I called Ellie instead. Eleanor Wren, Ellie, had been my best friend since graduate school. She was a pediatric nurse in Evanston, funny and unshockable, and the kind of person who never said everything happens for a reason, because she understood better than most that some things just happened. We talked for an hour and a half. I told her everything. The transfer, the meeting with Daniel, the trustee agreement, Karen and Tom showing up, all of it. Tom called the foundation a liability, I said, like he was trying to scare me out of it. Of course he did, Ellie said. That's what people like Tom do. They make you feel like you're one step from disaster, so you reach for whoever's standing closest, which would be him. Karen knew about the deposit. I still don't know exactly how. Ellie was quiet for a moment. You changed all your passwords, right? Everything? Everything. What about work? Your work email? I paused. Your firm's internal system, she said carefully. Is it possible they have access to something connected to you professionally? A filing, a disclosure, something that might reference your personal accounts? It hadn't occurred to me. But Tom was a real estate attorney with a network that stretched through the Chicago financial and legal community. He knew people. He called in favors. He was precisely the kind of person who would know someone who knew someone who had access to something they shouldn't. I'll look into it, I said. Sarah. Her voice was serious. This is real. You understand that? This isn't Karen being nosy at Christmas. This is intentional. They wanted access to your money before you even had money. I know. So don't let them make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. You have every right to what's been legally given to you. You didn't steal anything. You apologized for a $300 mistake. That's literally all you did. I laughed. A short, real laugh. The kind that releases something. When you put it that way. That is the way, she said firmly. On the last day at the Blue Heron, I sat at the window seat table and read through every document Patricia had sent. The foundation charter, the trustee agreement, the fiduciary guidelines. I read them the way I read compliance documents at work, line by line, annotating margins, looking for gaps. There were very few. Patricia was thorough. I also drafted a message to Daniel Park through the Foundation's secure communication channel. I thanked him for his trust. I outlined my first priorities: staff, program review, community partnerships. I kept it professional and clear. He responded within the hour. Mrs. Mitchell, Grace chose well. I have no doubt about this. I folded the papers, packed my bag, and drove back to Chicago. I was done hiding, done being small, done being the person in my family who was assumed to need managing. Whatever came next, I would meet it with the same thing I had given Daniel Park in that first message: honesty, clarity, no apology for existing. I was ready. They came back on a Friday evening, 10 days after my return from Michigan. This time, Karen called first, which was, in its own way, more alarming than the unannounced visit. It meant they had recalibrated. They were not improvising. They had a strategy. I feel terrible about how things ended last time, Karen said. Her voice had that particular softness she deployed when she needed something. Not weak, not pleading, but deliberately disarming, like a door left ajar. Can we start over? Tom and I would love to take you to dinner, somewhere nice, wherever you like. Just the three of us. We miss you. I said yes. I know how that sounds. But Patricia had advised me to keep communication open, to document everything, to give them the opportunity to say exactly what they meant. And I needed to see it for myself, not because I doubted what they were, but because I needed it on record. I told Patricia where and when we were meeting. I wore a blazer with an inner breast pocket. In that pocket was my phone, recording. We met at a restaurant in River North that Karen chose. Dark wood, good wine, the kind of place where serious conversations could be held under the cover of a pleasant evening. Tom ordered a bottle of something expensive and asked about my week, and Karen asked about the foundation, and for 40 minutes it was almost civilized. Then Tom set down his glass and said, "We want to propose something." "All right," I said. He smiled. "You're taking on an enormous responsibility, and we genuinely believe, that you shouldn't have to carry it alone. You've never managed a foundation before. The compliance work is one thing, but the relationships, the legal exposure, the strategic decisions, that requires a team." He leaned forward slightly. "We'd like to be part of that team. I can offer legal oversight. Karen has experience in nonprofit fundraising from her volunteer work. We're not asking for anything formal, just a role, the ability to be involved." There it was. Karen pressed her hands together on the table. "Sarah, I know things have been strained between us. I know I haven't always been as supportive as I should have been." Her eyes were bright, and they looked sincere. That was the frightening part, how sincere she could look. "But we're family, and I don't want money to come between us. I want this to bring us together." Money to come between us, as if the money were the problem, as if they had not tried to access my bank account in January, as if Tom had not called the foundation a liability to frighten me out of it and was now asking to have a role inside it. I let a moment pass. I picked up my wine glass. "I appreciate you both saying that," I said. "So you'll consider it?" Karen asked. "I've already structured the board and the staffing," I said. "The foundation has legal counsel through Patricia Chen's office. The trustee framework is finalized. There's no room for informal advisory roles. The charter doesn't allow for it." Tom's expression remained pleasant, but something behind it shifted. "Charters can be amended." "This one has a 45-day amendment period that's already passed," I said. "But more importantly, I don't want to amend it." Karen set down her fork. The warmth drained from her face in degrees, like water going out of a tub, slowly and then all at once. "You're shutting us out," she said. "Not a question. I'm running a foundation according to its legal structure." "Sarah." Tom's voice was quiet and cold now, all performance stripped away. "You don't understand who Daniel Park is. You don't understand what it means to be attached to a man with that kind of resources and that kind of scrutiny. One misstep, one financial irregularity, and everything you've built collapses, and when it does, it's not just the foundation, it's your career, your license." He paused. "You need people in your corner who are willing to tell you hard truths." "Like the hard truth that you tried to log into my bank account in January?" I said. The silence that followed was very complete. Karen's mouth opened slightly. Tom went very still. "I have the access log," I said. "The timestamp, the IP address, the device. It's registered to your home address in Naperville." I set my wine glass down precisely. "I have shared this with my attorney." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Tom stood up. His voice, when it came, was controlled, but only barely. "This conversation is over." Karen followed him. She didn't look at me. At the door, she turned back once, and what I saw on her face was not anger or guilt. It was calculation. She was already thinking about what came next. I sat at the table alone, finished my wine, and paid for my portion of the check. Walking home through the November air, I felt the fear, cold and specific, the fear of people who had nothing to lose and enough legal knowledge to be dangerous. But underneath it, there was something else, harder, cleaner. The fear had burned off everything soft and left only this, I was not going to yield. I had the evidence. I had the documentation. I had Patricia. And whatever Tom and Karen were planning, they had told me exactly what they were willing to do. Now I could plan accordingly. 3 weeks later, Patricia called me on a Monday morning and said, "They filed." I sat down. "Tom submitted a petition to the Cook County Probate Court," she said, arguing that the $31 million transfer constitutes an undisclosed gift with financial dependency implications, essentially claiming that you are unfit to serve as trustee due to an alleged personal relationship with Daniel Park that creates a conflict of interest. He's also filed a supplementary complaint alleging that the original transfer was made under conditions of financial undue influence. She paused. It's creative. It's also almost entirely without merit, but it will require a formal response, and it will generate publicity. He wants to drag it into public, I said. He wants to create enough noise that Daniel Park distances himself from you to protect the foundation's reputation. If the trusteeship collapses, the $31 million goes back into contested territory. Tom has likely identified a way to position himself as counsel for any restructuring proceedings. She was quiet for a moment. This is his real plan. It wasn't about getting a role in the foundation. It was about dismantling your role. I understood then the full shape of it. Karen had tried to access my accounts in January, not knowing what she was looking for, just maintaining access, maintaining visibility. When the $31 million appeared, Tom had mobilized. The dinner was to assess how vulnerable I was. When I proved not vulnerable enough, he had filed. He had expected me to be frightened. He had expected the publicity risk to make me capitulate, reach out to him, negotiate, give him something to make it stop. He did not know that I had spent 15 years as a compliance officer, that I had been documenting everything since the night I changed my passwords, that Patricia had already prepared for this. "I want to respond," I said, "not just legally, publicly. Tell me what you have in mind." We prepared for 2 weeks. Patricia filed the legal response, comprehensive, evidenced, methodical. She attached the bank access log from January. She attached the recording from the River North dinner. She attached a sworn statement from the IT security consultant who had traced the access attempt. She attached a timeline of Karen and Tom's contacts with me following the transfer, with annotations. The hearing was held on a Thursday at the Daly Center, courtroom 1704. I arrived early with Patricia and we sat at the respondents' table while the room filled. Tom came in with 2 colleagues, briefcases, pressed suits, the confident posture of a man who expects to be believed. Karen sat behind him in the gallery. She looked composed. She looked like someone who had done this before. The judge called the proceeding to order. Tom's opening argument was polished and precise. He painted a picture of a vulnerable woman who'd been manipulated by a wealthy and powerful man. An accidental payment used as a pretext to establish trust, a massive transfer with no formal agreement, a hasty trustee arrangement that lacked the proper protections. He used the phrase financial predation. He cited 3 precedents. He did not mention the bank access log. He did not mention that I knew about it. When Patricia rose to respond, the room was very quiet. She presented the evidence methodically. The access log, the dinner recording, played through a small speaker so the room could hear Tom's voice saying, "Charters can be amended, and one misstep, and everything you've built collapses." The full documentation of the trustee agreement, its legal soundness, the independent board review, the foundation charter approved by Illinois State Nonprofit Oversight, the statement from Daniel Park himself, submitted in writing, affirming that the transfer was intentional, documented, and fully reported to the IRS on both ends. And then Patricia submitted the communications log. Every call from Karen, every message from Tom, every contact attempt, time-stamped and annotated, going back to February, including a text message Tom had sent 3 days after the River North dinner from his personal phone to a colleague in the financial sector. Need to move quickly on the Mitchell situation. If this becomes public, it gets complicated. The colleague had, as it turned out, already spoken with the Illinois Attorney General's office about a separate matter involving Tom's firm, and had provided this message voluntarily. The Mitchell situation. That was me. That was what I was to them. Tom's composure began to fracture somewhere in the middle of Patricia's presentation. He interrupted twice. The judge silenced him both times. Karen in the gallery had stopped looking composed. She was very still in the way people are still when they are recalculating, looking at exits. When the judge addressed Tom directly and asked him to explain the bank access log, Tom said it was a mistake, a misidentification of devices, a technical error. "Mr. Bauer," the judge said, her voice completely flat, "the access attempt was made from an IP address registered to your home at 11:47 on a Sunday morning, while your sister-in-law's laptop was in your possession." She looked at him over her reading glasses. "Please explain the technical error." He could not. The judge recessed to consider. We waited in the corridor. Patricia calm, me holding a paper cup of coffee I didn't drink, watching the courthouse's fluorescent light fall on the marble floor. Karen came into the corridor. She walked toward me slowly. She stopped 3 feet away. "You didn't have to do this," she said. Her voice was different. Not warm, not calculated, just flat. Tired. "You tried to access my bank account," I said. "You tried to dismantle my career. You told a court I was being financially preyed upon by a man I had never met before, to destroy a foundation built in memory of a dead woman." I looked at her steadily. "Yes, Karen, I did have to do this." She looked away. She didn't respond. The judge returned. The petition was dismissed, entirely with prejudice. The court found the filing to be without evidentiary basis and noted, for the record, that the evidence submitted by the respondent raised questions warranting referral to the Illinois State Bar and the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Tom, for the first time since I had known him, had nothing to say. The referrals were not symbolic. I want to be clear about that because the word referral can sound administrative, procedural, the kind of thing that gets filed and forgotten. This was not that. The Illinois State Bar opened a formal disciplinary investigation into Tom Bauer within 3 weeks of the hearing. The basis, the bank access log, the recorded dinner conversation, and the text message referencing the Mitchell situation. A compliance attorney who has documented evidence of unauthorized access to a client's financial accounts, followed by a coordinated legal filing designed to create financial pressure. That is not a gray area. Tom knew exactly what he had done. He had simply not expected to be caught. The state's attorney's office opened a parallel inquiry. Patricia kept me informed at each stage, but insulated me from the proceedings themselves. I had provided everything they needed in sworn statements, and my presence was not required. I was not the one trying to destroy anyone's life. I was simply the one who had kept records. Tom resigned from his firm in April before the bar investigation concluded, which told me, and anyone watching, what the outcome of that investigation was going to be. The resignation was framed as personal reasons. His firm released a 1-paragraph statement. Several of his colleagues did not return subsequent calls from journalists covering the story. Karen. I need to say something honest about Karen. She had not, technically, done anything illegal. She had not been the one to access the login portal. Tom had, from their shared home network. She had not filed the petition. She had not sent the text message. She had made phone calls asking about my finances. She had come to my apartment under false pretenses. She had sat in a courtroom while her husband tried to dismantle my life. Under the law, most of that is not actionable. But I had a lawyer, a $31 million foundation, and 15 years of professional discipline. I did not need to take legal action against Karen. The situation took its own action on her. Their joint assets came under scrutiny during the Barr investigation because Tom's business and personal finances were intertwined in ways that raised questions. A second mortgage on the Naperville house, several investment accounts under joint ownership that became part of disclosure proceedings. Karen had not known the full extent of Tom's financial dealings, or at least that was what she told me when she called in May, crying in a way she had never cried around me before, without calculation, without warmth deployed as strategy, just someone whose life had come apart and who needed to say it aloud. I let her say it. "I didn't know," she said, "about the access attempt. I didn't ask him to do that." I believed her, and I didn't. What I knew was that she had watched me be made small for years and done nothing to stop it, had in fact participated in the gentle, persistent way of someone who benefits from another person's smallness. I was not able to give her absolution for that. She would need to find it somewhere else. "I hope things get easier for you," I said. It was true, and it was all I had. We did not speak again for a long time. The foundation launched publicly in June, the Grace Park Foundation for Women's Financial Independence, with an initial endowment of $31 million, a staff of 7, and programs in 5 states designed to give women access to the financial literacy education that too many of us were never given. My name was listed as director. My photograph appeared in 3 press articles. 2 of them mentioned the unusual circumstances of my appointment. Daniel's team had agreed on a brief, accurate statement that described the situation without sensationalism, and it held up well under scrutiny because it was simply true. I was at my desk in the Foundation's new Michigan Avenue office, 2 floors below Park Capitol, when the final piece arrived. Patricia sent it as a document, flagged urgent, the Bar Association's preliminary findings. Tom's law license was suspended pending further review, with a recommendation for permanent revocation based on the totality of the evidence. I read it twice. I printed a copy. I filed it, carefully, methodically, in a manila folder labeled with a date. Compliance officers keep records, even when the case is closed. I sat for a while at my new desk, in my new office, looking at the Chicago skyline through a window larger than any I had ever worked in front of. It was early evening, and the light was doing something remarkable with the lake, turning the water that particular blue-gray that only exists in early summer, when the city is still waking up from winter and everything feels briefly possible. I thought about the $300, about typing a wrong account number in a tired moment at a kitchen table, about writing, "I'm sorry" to a stranger at 7 in the evening and meaning it simply, without strategy or calculation, because it was the right thing to say. I had not known what that honesty would cost me or what it would return. I had simply been honest because I didn't know how else to be. That, I thought, was enough. The summer after the foundation launched was the best summer I could remember since childhood. The open, unbounded kind, when possibility doesn't feel like a threat, but simply like weather. I moved apartments in July, not extravagantly. The $31 million belonged to the foundation and not to me, and I administered it with the same precision I had given to 15 years of compliance work. My director's salary was enough to afford a 2-bedroom in Wicker Park with a real kitchen and windows on 2 sides, and the morning light felt like something I had earned, which it was. I hired a small, excellent team. Our program officer, Rosa, had worked in community finance for 12 years and brought partnerships that accelerated everything. We launched our first cohort of the Women's Financial Foundation program in September. 42 women in 4 cities, coaching, classes, small grants for business development. The local press covered it. Then a national publication did. Daniel attended our launch quietly, standing at the back of the room. Afterward, stacking chairs, he said, "Grace would have wanted to meet you." "I would have liked that," I said. We have dinner occasionally now, as people who have been through something unusual together. Ellie threw me a small party in her Evanston backyard in August. 8 people, a string of lights, very good food. I stood in the middle of it and felt, very simply, happy. "You look different," she said, handing me a glass of wine. "Good different," I said. Karen and Tom's life in Naperville was considerably altered. The house went on the market. Between the legal costs, the scrutiny of their joint accounts, and Tom's suspension, the finances had become unworkable. Karen took a part-time position at a nonprofit. Tom was consulting in areas that didn't require a license. The pool sat unused, as it always had. I heard about these things through our mother. I did not wish Karen harm. I also did not lose sleep over consequences that followed in entirely logical succession from choices she and Tom had made deliberately. Consequences are not punishment. They are simply the things that follow. My professional reputation had been quietly restored. The rigor of our governance and the quality of our programs had, within 6 months, made the initial gossip feel beside the point. At a conference in October, a woman said our story was the most interesting hiring process she'd ever encountered. It was, I agreed. I don't believe the universe rewards goodness automatically. But the habits of character you build in ordinary moments are the same habits that carry you through the extraordinary ones. I had spent 15 years being careful and honest because it mattered. When everything changed, those were the habits I had. They were enough. In December, I sat at my kitchen table. Late evening, a glass of something warm, and opened my banking app. I looked at the balance for a long time. Then I smiled, closed the app, and went to bed.